Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Dr. Kristy Beam. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning here in City Schools of Decatur. I'm so proud of the work that we've done in Decatur for the last couple of years to provide all of our students with a strong foundation in literacy that is embedded in the science of reading. In 2019, the Georgia Assembly passed Senate Bill 48 into law. The bill requires that school systems develop policies that refer certain elementary students to dyslexia screening, and this must be implemented by the 2024-2025 school year. However, City Schools of Decatur, we always aspire to be leaders in education. So in 2020, we were accepted to participate in a dyslexia pilot program along with 6 other Georgia districts. I'm proud to say that we have far exceeded the mandated deadline and we have gone well beyond the requirements of the law. We're here tonight to share some about the wonderful work that we're doing for our students. And I want to say a huge thank you to IDA Georgia for their partnership, and Jen Burch and Amelia Morel for sharing their expertise with us tonight. And I am thrilled to be joined by my CSD colleagues, Ms. Courtney Simon, Dr. Gail Hardwick, and Dr. Holly Brookins.
Hello and good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Dr. Holly Brookins, and I will be your moderator this evening. I'm the principal of Glenwood Elementary School in City Schools of Decatur. We serve students in grades K through 2. Prior to coming to CSD 2 years ago, I spent 4 years at Morningside Elementary as an assistant principal and program administrator. During my time at Morningside, we worked closely with the Dyslexia Resource, Georgia ETA, and Made by Dyslexia to provide teachers with tools for their toolbox, as well as to spotlight the work that our teachers were doing. I am so excited to be here in City Schools of Decatur now, and I'm excited about all of the wonderful work that is happening here. City Schools of Decatur is excited to partner with IDA Georgia to sponsor this presentation this evening. As a nonprofit organization, IDA Georgia, International Dyslexia Association of Georgia, is dedicated to helping individuals living with dyslexia, a learning difference that affects up to 20% of the U.S. population, as well as their families and the communities that support them. Our goal is to provide essential, evidence-based research information about assessment, diagnosis, resources, and appropriate educational intervention. They offer information and referral, community outreach events, professional education conferences, and teacher training opportunities to increase public awareness and remediation of dyslexia. Outreach events from other IDA branches and various credible sources are also listed on their website, so be sure to check back often. And we'll show you that website at the end. Our first presenters this evening have a wealth of knowledge and experience that they will be sharing with us. Both serve on the board of the International Dyslexia Association of Georgia. Their names are Jen Burch and Amelia Morel. Both Amelia and Jen are fellows in training with the Academy of Orton Gillingham. And I had the pleasure of working with Amelia at Morningside. She is a 3rd grade teacher there, and she has taught grades 3, 4, 5, and 8. She's also taught as a reading interventionist in grades 1st through 5th. Jen is currently the Purpose-Built Schools Atlanta project coordinator for the dyslexia resource at the Skank School. This project is specifically working to remediate students in an underserved public school in Atlanta. So next, you'll hear from Amelia.
Good evening. This is the International Dyslexia Association's definition of dyslexia. Dyslexia is a specific learning disability that is neurobiological in origin. So that means that people with dyslexia's brains process information differently than non-dyslexics. It's characterized by difficulties with accurate and fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language that is often unexpected in relation to other cognitive abilities and the provision of effective classroom instruction. So what you're talking about there is really bright kids that have had really good classroom instruction, but still are struggling to learn to read. Secondary consequences may include problems in reading comprehension and reduced reading experience that can impede the growth of vocabulary and background knowledge. So since reading is really hard for dyslexic kids, they often avoid it. And when you don't read as much as you would have, it impedes your vocabulary and the background knowledge that you would have gained had you been reading. So what is dyslexia? So it is a neurobiological difference. It's a language-based disability, and it's hereditary. I'm going to start with the neurobiological difference and sort of explain what that means. So because of many, many, many brain scans and a lot of research on the reading brain, we know that reading is predominantly done in the left hemisphere of the brain. And there are 3 regions that you can see here that are activated in a typical reader. Now, for us that are fluent readers, it seems that reading is just easy and you just look at a word and you read it. But really, our brains are processing every single letter as we read. It's just done so quickly that you almost don't feel it. So I think we take for granted how hard reading really is when you're first learning to read. So you have to look at a letter, identify the letter, connect it to the sounds of the language, put those both together, then blend the whole word, and then attach meaning to it. So it's a lot more complicated than we think now that we can read fluently. So that was the typical brain, reading brain. And if you look at this image, you'll see that the dyslexic reading brain is very different, which is what makes it a neurobiological difference. In the dyslexic brain, that front green region is working properly, but the other regions aren't working as well. This makes reading very difficult for dyslexic children and also labor intensive and time consuming because their brains just don't process reading as quickly as non-dyslexic brains. So again, it's neurobiological difference. It's also a language-based disability. So a language-based disability means that these kids will have trouble with spoken language, especially word retrieval. They'll have difficulty reading. They'll have difficulty spelling, like they might spell the word stick, S-T-I-K. They will have difficulty writing because if spelling is hard, then that slows down your writing fluency. It's also hereditary and it runs on a continuum. So if a person has dyslexia, their children have a 40 to 60% chance of also having dyslexia. And it runs on a continuum. You can have mild, moderate, or severe dyslexia. And even within that continuum, each dyslexic individual has their own unique ways that it impacts them. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about some common myths about dyslexia. All of these are not true, but they do get passed off as truth a lot of the times. So number 1, dyslexia is a vision problem. So as we saw with the brain scans, it has nothing to do with vision. It is difficulty with the processing of language in the brain, which is not a vision problem. Dyslexic kids see, and adults see letters and words the same way as non-dyslexics. Number 2, dyslexia is seeing things backwards, or reversals of letters and words is a sign of dyslexia. So all kids, when they're learning to write, will write in reverse. That is very common. It is not a sign of dyslexia. It could be a sign that letters and spelling are not yet firmly established in a child, but not so much a sign of dyslexia. Number 3, if a child has dyslexia, they're of low intelligence. So IQ and dyslexia are completely separate. You can be of low intelligence, average intelligence, or high intelligence and still have dyslexia. 4, dyslexics are just not motivated or lazy. So dyslexics are working just as hard, a lot of times harder than their peers just to keep up. And telling a dyslexic kid to just try harder really isn't going to get you very far. Number 5, more boys than girls have dyslexia. So schools often identify boys more frequently than girls with dyslexia. But if we look at the research, the rates of dyslexia in boys and girls are completely equal. 6, dyslexia fonts help dyslexics to read. So again, it's a neurobiological difference. It has to do with processing of language in the brain. And so those fonts really can't help fix that issue. And so they don't help. 7, dyslexia is curable. It is not curable. It is a lifelong neurobiological difference. Accommodations and interventions can help lessen the impact, though, on a dyslexic individual's life. 8, children will outgrow dyslexia. It's just developmental. Using the wait and see approach with a dyslexic child is completely ineffective. The longer you wait to intervene, the more difficult it is to remediate. And the longer you wait, the greater the impact on that child's self-esteem. So earlier, the better. 9, dyslexia is only found in English speakers. It's actually found in every country of the world and in both logographic and alphabetic languages. And number 10, a person with dyslexia will never learn to read. They will absolutely learn to read. The earlier the intervention, the better. And it needs to be explicit, structured, systematic, and multisensory intervention. And early the better, but even older children with dyslexia and adults can also learn to read with appropriate interventions. Okay, and then some red flags to look for sort of by age group. In preschool, you're looking for kids that are late learning to talk, have slow development of vocabulary, have difficulty pronouncing words correctly. They can have difficulty with speech sounds. They may not enjoy books being read aloud to them. They have trouble learning the letters of the alphabet and trouble rhyming. For kindergarten and first grade, you're looking for difficulty with phonological awareness tasks, difficulty remembering the names of letters and recalling them quickly, difficulty with sound to symbol relationships, difficulty spelling sounds of words in a way that can be recognizable to a reader. And the last, second grade and above, you're looking for difficulty with sight words, difficulty with decoding of words, especially when you give them nonsense words or words that they've not memorized, poor spelling, slow disfluent reading. They may avoid reading and writing altogether. They may have difficulty with reading comprehension, and they may have difficulty learning a foreign language. So now Jen Burch is going to take over.
All right, thanks, Amelia. I know when my daughter got diagnosed with dyslexia, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm the only person in the world that has a daughter that has problems with reading. She's so smart, she's so bright, what's going on? But it turns out that dyslexia is very prevalent. It is estimated that 15 to 20% of the population as a whole has some of the symptoms of dyslexia. And that means, if you look at this figure to the right, that 1 out of every 5 children has dyslexia and struggles to read. In a typical classroom, that means 4 of the kids in that class will struggle at some point to read and has dyslexic traits. And furthermore, we know that we do have a problem in this country with struggling readers. The National Assessment of Educational Progress, known as the NAEP, assesses 4th and 8th graders in this country. And it turns out that only 35% of US 4th grade students and only 34% of US 8th grade students as of 2019 were proficient in reading and writing. So there are struggling readers in every classroom. And so what's the best way to help a child who's struggling to read or has been diagnosed with dyslexia? And we know now, based on decades of research, that structured literacy is the best way to help a child who is struggling to read. It is diagnostic, explicit, and systematic and cumulative. So what do we mean by that? It's systematic. It goes from simple to complex, and it proceeds in a logical sequence. It goes from the more regular features of the language to the more irregular features of the language, so that kids learn sequentially how to attack and decode the language, and also to write and spell words. It is also cumulative, which means you don't just teach something and leave it. You teach it, you continually spiral back in order to reinforce and provide continual practice of that specific skill. Number 2, it's explicit. It is teacher directed. The teacher doesn't give them a worksheet to help expose them on their own. They're going to do it directed in front of the classroom. So they'll do it. We proceed in an I do, we do, you do model. So it's, I'm going to model it. We're going to do it together. And then we'll have some guided practice and some independent practice. So at the end of the day or the end of the skill level, they'll have mastered that skill. It's also diagnostic. It is personalized. So the teacher continually looks at how those kids are proceeding through that scope and sequence and is analyzing, well, do we need to slow down? Do we need to speed up? Are they getting it? Are they not getting it? In order to really respond to how those kiddos are doing with those specific skills. So what are the essential elements of structural literacy? We need to have some phonology. Kids need to know that when we speak the word cat, it's not just one big sound. There are 3 individual sounds. It's k, a, t, right? And we can separate those, we can substitute them, we can manipulate the language. Number 2, we associate the sound that we speak to a symbol, so the letter. And we make those associations, and so that when we decode, if we say d, we automatically pull that D from our memory. We also have explicit instruction in syllables, all right? What syllable types, how to break apart a word in order to both read it and spell it. We expose the kids to morphology. We study base words, roots, prefixes, and suffixes, so that kiddos and students can break apart words by meaning. So if they know that form means to shape, then they can figure out, okay, all these words have form in it. They must all have something to do with shaping something. And we're going to teach those association, as well as how to look for those base words, as well as prefixes and suffixes within the words. Number 5, looking at syntax. So how a sentence is composed really dictates what we see in our head. So the cat chases the dog is a completely different sentence in my head versus the dog chases the cat. So how words are arranged in a sentence is important. It's important to know how words relate to each other in a sentence and what that grammar and syntax, how that affects what we see in our head. And finally, semantics. It has to do how we comprehend what we read or what we hear, right? We need to know vocabulary words. We need to, because at the end of the day, when we read, we need to understand things. We need to have an idea about what this vocabulary word means, because if we don't understand, then we can't make any sense of it. And then who benefits from structural literacy? All students benefit from it. At the very top in the purple, 5% of students are natural readers. For them, learning to read is almost effortless. They're sitting in bed at night and they're just kind of, it all just comes together. Their brain has all those circuits connecting and they're wired so hard and they just, they just do it without a whole lot of instruction. For 35% of the students, learning to read is relatively easy with some good instruction. They have a great teacher who's, giving them some good instruction in the classroom, like read this, we're gonna do some guided reading, some other stuff. For 40 to 50% of the students, learning to read requires structural literacy. They need that explicit and cumulative. They need the diagnostic teaching. And they need it, to be teacher directed. They need it laid out there. And then they learn to read really well. And then for the bottom 10 to 15%, those are our dyslexic kids. They require the structured literacy, but they also require it with more frequency in smaller groups because their brain needs more time to make those connections. And so as we see on the left-hand side, 40% of the students, it enhances their learning, but in 60% of the students, it's essential at the end of the day. And finally, for the dyslexia portion of the presentation, before intervention, you have these areas that are, light up when a student reads a word. But after intervention, that brain is malleable It's forming these new circuits. It's whether it's, it's good news. We can always rewire the brain. So these are like great brain scans, good news. We appropriate and immediate intervention. We get these circuits rewired. And now I'm going to turn it over to our friends at the City Schools of Decatur and Dr. Courtney Simon.
Good evening. I'm Courtney Simon, Director of English Language Arts and Social Studies K-12 at the City Schools of Decatur. And I would also like to introduce Dr. Gail Hardwick, Reading District Coach. Since September 2020, we have accomplished the following. First, we created a systemic plan for screening all students in grades K to 3 to identify characteristics of dyslexia. Currently, we are using MAP reading and Acadience for screening all students in grades K through 2. We use Ames Web as a secondary screener in the 3rd grade. Students that meet the criteria on those assessments are referred for an individual screening using the KTEA3, which is known as the Kaufman Test of Educational Achievement, 3rd edition. The pilot requires that we provide interventions for students that are identified with characteristics of dyslexia. One of our district priority initiatives is to create a guaranteed and viable curriculum for all students. So going beyond the requirements of SB 48, we have made the conscious decision to universally screen all students, provide all students with explicit instruction and structured phonics, and train all classroom teachers. However, there is not a one-size-fits-all approach to serving our students. We start with a strong structured phonics approach for all students, which Dr. Hardwick will tell you more about. Then we layer more support depending on the student's needs. Service could look like Tier 2 support in the general classroom, small group instruction, early intervention program, or if a student does not make adequate progress with these interventions based on a regular progress monitoring assessment, then a recommendation may be made for a psychological evaluation. So in summary, we are currently at the point required by 2024 because we believe that the important work that we are doing as part of the dyslexia pilot will help us identify students earlier and ensure that students' areas of weaknesses are aligned with instructional practices within Tier 1, as well as alignment with Tier 2 and 3 interventions and progress monitoring tools. Now, our district reading coach, Dr. Hardwick, will share some more in-depth information about our instructional programs. Dr. Hardwick.
Good evening. Next slide. Good evening. Foundations was developed by an original Orton Gillingham Fellow, Barbara Wilson. Foundations instruction emphasizes phonemic awareness, phonics word study, high-frequency word study, fluency, vocabulary, handwriting, and spelling. Foundations is Tier 1 instruction and supports all K-3 students here in CSD. So when we are teaching Foundations, we are supporting everyone, students with characteristics of dyslexia and students without. All students benefit from learning explicit, systematic, multisensory structured phonics. Our teachers teach Foundations with fidelity and use the built-in assessments and check-ins to drive instruction each day. Because of this, all of the lesson components and learning activities mirror Orton-Gillingham best practices. American Reading Company, also known as ARC Core, is our comprehensive core curriculum. Teachers use the ARC Core structure to orchestrate highly engaging, content-rich inquiry units in which students are the drivers of their own learning, preparing them for 21st century success. ARC is aligned to the science of reading and grounded in the following essential elements: oral language, phonological awareness, phonics, orthographic mapping, building knowledge and vocabulary, extensive reading of connected text, fiction and nonfiction, diagnostic and prescriptive assessment, as well as progress monitoring. In addition to the universal screeners that Ms. Simon spoke about, to monitor students, we replaced Fountain and Pinnell with the ongoing literacy assessment provided by ARC Core called the IRLA, or the Independent Reading Leveled Assessment Framework. The IRLA is a unified standards-based framework for student assessment, text leveling, and curriculum and instruction. The IRLA includes every Common Core state standard for reading, both in literature and informational text, as well as those language standards key to reading success. In addition to ARC Core, CSD has additional supports to strengthen our literacy instruction. For example, Hegerty is a Tier 1 for all students pre-K through first grade. This curriculum presents explicit and systematic phonemic awareness lessons to reflect the progression of important literacy skills. Just Words is a Tier 2 intervention for students in grade 4 and 5. Just Words is a concentrated word study program with an emphasis on phonemic awareness, alphabetic principle, word study, and English orthography. We are also engaged in a language essentials for teachers of reading and spelling cohort, also known as LETTERS. LETTERS is a 2-year professional development course for educators that translates current research into practical guidance. Additional supports that strengthen our literacy instruction include the July 2021 summer 70-hour course taught by a certified training fellow of the Academy of Orton-Gillingham. There were 20 people trained. Currently, we are hosting another 70-hour OG course on Saturdays once a month throughout the year. There are another 20 teachers attending this course. By May 2022, we will have 40 teachers trained at the associate level. In addition, CSD is funding teacher practicums. This would mean that teachers will be supervised by a certified fellow of the Academy of Orton-Gillingham to ensure that the OG approach is being implemented with fidelity.
All right, thank you. So for more information, please check out the Georgia Department of Education Dyslexia Handbook. And there's the website right there. Okay, so next we have some questions and answers that Dr. Beam, our Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning, is going to answer. So these are some of the questions that some of the participants tonight had. So Dr. Beam, I don't see you quite yet.
I'm here.
You're there. There you are. Okay, great. So Dr. Beam, how can parents talk to their kids about their learning differences?
Well, I would strongly suggest that first, educating yourself is a really important avenue to speaking with your students. You want to be able to share factual, age-appropriate information. You want to let them lead the conversations and what questions they have, and then answer, like I said, factually. You want to know the answers. If you don't know answers, which is fine, that's a good learning opportunity, and you and your student can research them together. Try to be positive. If your student has been struggling with reading, their self-esteem may have suffered. So it may be a relief to them to know that there is an actual reason for the problem that they've been experiencing, and there is a solution. Some great resources would be the Yale Center for Dyslexia and Creativity. They have a section on their website called What Parents Can Do. Also, the IDA website has a wealth of resources for parents and articles that you might find helpful.
Wonderful, thank you. Can you talk a little bit about how gifted kids who also have IEPs or dyslexia can succeed, and how teachers and parents can encourage and best help these kids?
I do know a little about that. I was a gifted program teacher for about 13 years, and I've taught gifted endorsement to incoming teachers for many years as well. And I have to say that there's probably at least as many myths about giftedness as there is about dyslexia, or are about dyslexia. You know, everyone has strengths and challenges, and for twice exceptional students, such as those that are gifted and also have dyslexia, they may be more pronounced. But all the same advice I just gave is really important. Just, educate yourself, understand factual information, and don't rely on, hearsay and myths and things like that. Do your research, talk to your student honestly and factually. Giftedness, understand that, help them understand that, giftedness may come with challenges such as, increased anxiety, sensitivity, those kind of things, while dyslexia may hold some long-term rewards related to creativity, creative thinking, perseverance, that kind of thing. So, try to avoid indications that differences are, one is good and one is bad or something like that. They're just differences. And so they come with differences, and we build on, like all differences, we build on our strengths and we work to overcome our obstacles.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have talked mostly about what is being done at the K-3 level through universal screening and early intervention. We received some questions about what is being done at each level, elementary, middle, and high, to assess and address students with reading difficulties. Can you talk a little bit more about that, please?
Yes. So in 4th and 5th grade, we continue with our ARC core curriculum for both whole group and small group instruction for all students. For our students that need additional support, we use a Wilson program called Just Words, which is a highly explicit, multisensory decoding and spelling program for students who have mild to moderate gaps in decoding and spelling, gaps in spelling proficiency and decoding. So at the middle and high school level, we implement a remedial education program as mandated by Georgia law, which provides for individualized basic skills instruction in areas of reading, math, and writing. But as I said, we always try to exceed those expectations, and in an attempt to target the specialized needs of our secondary students, we have at both Renfro and Decatur High School, we've added additional ELA support teachers. We have a reading specialist at both secondary schools that are supporting the needs of students who are identified through screening and through the MTSS process. So at Renfro and Decatur High School, there is a comprehensive approach to serving students as learners with specific strengths and areas of necessary growth. So all students in 6 through 10 continue to take MAP, the measures of academic progress in reading and math, and then that provides our baseline data. So through the MTSS model, all students at the secondary level continue to receive instruction and support at Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Students in the general population are all Tier 1 students. So all students receive best practices and literacy instruction, and within the ELA classroom and typical supports. So students that have been identified as reading below grade level receive Tier 2 supports and intervention in the general ed classroom. So I'm also pleased to respond that we have a rich network of interventions and strategies that are used in student learning. So Tier 1 support always starts with high quality instruction. Students within the ELA department at Decatur High School have weekly planning sessions and weekly data review sessions. So some of those, sorry, you're probably hearing rustling. So anyway, some of those look like I said, they have the weekly planning sessions, and they're sequencing their curriculum, and they're planning that carefully through their ongoing formative assessments. And so students are encouraged to engage in meaningful content, learning skills, rather than just regurgitating facts. So it's important that the students are engaged it's important that we offer meaningful instructions for the students to stay engaged. So the focus on growth is purposeful. The MYP IB program's philosophical focus on engagement and integration of knowledge versus the listing of facts shapes the development of literacy through our secondary programs. So data review sessions are held regularly, and they're used to identify students who need support and classroom trends that need to be addressed. Literacy experiences are embedded in all ELA classrooms and are supportive of students with dyslexia and specific learning disabilities. Then they offer win time as well. So there's 2 dedicated sessions within the academic week at Decatur High School for small group instruction and support in literacy skills based on individual student need. And then there's multiple delivery models, and in the classroom, teachers use auditory, digital display. They archive work into Google Classroom so students can review and have hard copies if needed. And then there are multiple literacies are accessed through direct teaching, through direct literacy, through video, through audio, text, through traditional text. So multiple avenues for students to learn. And all of those are taught explicitly within the ELA classrooms. And then teachers use a variety of self-assess options to engage students in their own learning and help them determine to self-assess, like I said, to help them assess for understanding. And so things like Nearpod lessons embed that, Kahoot is used, kids love that, and then Google Survey. And then we have one-to-one technology where typed notes and responses rather than handwriting, and that helps avoid fatigue that's associated with dyslexia and specific learning disabilities. Voice to text is also an option for students. Students with significant literacy deficits are designated as needing Tier 3 intervention services and receive small group literacy instruction through Read 180 and literacy instruction within their, of course, Read 180 and literacy instruction through their ELA classroom, because we always want intervention to be an additional dose, not instead of rich grade level instruction. So for students in grades 10, 11, and 12, they receive small group intervention or literacy intervention in the REP classroom. And that is a content and scope and sequence that matches the traditional classroom. So they are getting that same rigorous level of instruction, but they integrate the necessary intervention. So we always want our students to meet the same outcomes. It's just the supports that we provide to get them there. And then the assessments and services in special education, ESOL and gifted continue, of course, in our secondary schools, and students may qualify for those based on state and federal criteria. The goal, which of course is mandated by federal law and best practices, is to always serve students in the least restrictive environment. So.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Beam. And for our final question, could you please advise on the rights of families and best practices for obtaining 504s and/or IEPs in CSD. CSD has seemed to require that students be scoring below the 50th percentile on standardized tests, getting poor grades, or having severe behavioral issues in order to be considered eligible. Can you share a little bit more about this, please?
Well, absolutely. So first of all, as far as rights, parents always have the right to request an evaluation for their child for either a 504 or an IEP. However, the request for evaluation does not mean they are going to meet the criteria for that. And I just want to, I can't say enough that the importance of teaching reading or remediating is in the interventions. Not, a program is not necessary to receive most of these interventions. So, CSD of course follows state and federal guidelines for 504 and IEP eligibility. And, the same, we don't create the guidelines, we follow the guidelines, we implement the guidelines, with fidelity, of course, so that we are in compliance with state and federal law. The law does not state that because you have a diagnosis, you have an eligibility for a 504 or an IEP, because for most students, we can, with effective teacher training, with high quality resources and effective instruction, we can serve those students in Tier 1, and that is the goal. So rather, what the law says is that 504 and IEPs, to make the eligible determinations, you have to determine that there is an adverse, that the disability is causing an adverse educational impact, and that the student needs specially designed instruction, and that there is a documentation of substantial limitations in the school setting. So the student is not meeting grade level standards. So these terms and phrases can be subjective. So we do have to, set criteria, and we do have to see what this looks like in practice. And in order to do that, we have to have evidence. So, what do we use as evidence? Obviously, we use, all the evidence we have available. So our assessments, we include grades, we include parent reports, we include teacher observation, we include student input, we include assessments such as MAP, Georgia milestones, and the other assessments that we may have. So, a school has to, we have to provide support for the student. And if there's, sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second. So if the school does not have concrete support for the student, then we can't say that there's been an adverse educational impact, because we have to provide those supports in order for that to happen. So the student is not, if the student is not responding to those interventions, then there's an adverse effect. Okay, so if there's not an adverse effect every day or substantial limitations every day, then there is not evidence that the disability is impacting the educational environment. So if all of that happens, then what we do is we revisit the interventions. If the student does not qualify for, services through those programs, we need to go back and we need to revisit the Tier 1 supports, the Tier 2 interventions that are being provided in general education, to make sure we are providing and aligning those interventions with the needs of the student, and that they are being effective. And students can receive those interventions even if they don't qualify for a 504 or an IEP. It's the interventions that are important and are going to make a difference for the child. So as far as qualifying for the program, we have to be equitable, and we have to be in compliance with the state and federal guidelines. So we make every effort to service our students in general education effectively, and show that all students show the growth that that we all want them to see. We have to have clear assessment data to show that they are not meeting grade level expectations with these interventions in order to qualify for a program. So through the Georgia multi-tiered systems of supports, that ensures that students receive the support and interventions that they need. So part of the Georgia multi-tiered systems of supports beyond just our typical classroom instruction and our tier 2 supports, a student may qualify for early intervention program or for the remedial education program at secondary. So there are some, so just to give you some examples of guidelines of that, we need multiple pieces of evidence to show that the student meets the criteria of these programs. And some of the guidance that we are provided from the state is that a student has to fail an ELA class. That's one example of criteria. Or a student is scoring below the 25th percentile on a standardized assessment, or a student is scoring at the beginning level on Georgia milestones in order to qualify, for one of those programs. So we have to have certain criteria in place for that. So some of the important points to remember in summary of all of that is if your child is having academic or behavioral challenges, remember all students are receiving differentiated instruction in their general ed classroom through small group, through differentiated assignments, through additional supports. We can support most students through high quality core instruction and teacher training and the effective instruction in the general ed classroom. All students do learn differently and we need to accommodate for that. So one score also, one low score does not define a student. It does not define their progress, their potential, or their abilities. We have to have multiple pieces of evidence and look, over time. Georgia special ed eligibility, specifically under specific learning disabilities, requires documentation of interventions for a minimum of 12 weeks. We have to show that we are unable to serve that child, that they're not meeting those interventions in the classroom are not effective and that they need more service before we can find a child eligible for that. Also a psychological, like I said, a psychological report, whether it's our report through evaluation or an outside report, does not automatically qualify a child for 504 or an IEP. So school-based decisions regarding referrals and evaluations should be based on student progress data and determination of those appropriate interventions. And then SST meetings are super important. Parents should be at the table. The whole team decision should be to make the determination on how we can best meet the needs of the student. And that could have multiple outcomes. It could be to, change interventions, or it could be a 50, let's do a, the student needs a 504 plan and additional tier 2 interventions, or it could be any combination of things. So it's the services and the intervention are what are going to make a difference for the student, not necessarily the program, because the programs we do have, we have to stay in compliance with those. So. That was a long answer. I hope somewhere in there I answered the question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Beam. So I wanted to make sure to acknowledge the educators, the teachers in City Schools of Decatur who are just doing incredible work, particularly those who have, some of them took part of their summer to do the 70-hour Orton Gillingham course, and some of them are doing one Saturday a month to fulfill the hours, including Dr. Hardwick. Dr. Hardwick also plans to work towards her associate level, so we're very excited. And I just want to make sure that we acknowledge all of the hard work that our educators and our teachers are doing. Panelists, did any of you want to share anything else?
I do see there's some more questions in the chat, and I can maybe together we can try to answer some of those if we haven't already.
Sure.
I see Jen asked about kindergarten and first grade map. It is being read to them, and can I explain how this helps identify dyslexic students? Well, just like we talked about some of the, so what map kindergarten and first grade measures is reading readiness. And just like we talked about some of those things that you can look for in preschool students, obviously they're not reading yet. So it's you know, do they recognize letter sounds, things like that. Also, MAP is kind of our baseline to see if there's any evidence that we might need to give those more specific assessments. Also, remember, we have to have multiple forms of data, and MAP is one of the ones that's identified as a screener by the state of Georgia. So it does give us some baseline data. And I can more specifically, last year, what we did was we looked at the various assessments and what they measure, what each assessment measures. So we wanted to be sure, because we had some redundancy in our previous or former assessment plans. And so we wanted to be sure that we are getting, you know, measuring different skills with different assessments. So that's why we have landed on where we are now. So I hope that helps. Did you want to add anything, Dr. Brookins, or anyone else?
No, I think you covered it. We have a question about letters and which teachers have been trained in letters and approximately how many have done letters training. I know we've heard great things about that training as well.
So Gail can probably speak to that a little more. She's a certified trainer now, and there's about 20 of us that are in the program. It is quite a rigorous program. It is, I would have to say, it's pretty much on par with a master's degree. It is a 2-year program, quite in depth, with a lot of reading and work and meetings. And so, you know, that we can't require that teachers attend that. So we will be starting a second cohort. I think it's been, you know, wonderful, but we've also been through COVID, and it's a very stressful time for people. So I understand that, you know, not everyone can commit to that right now. But I think we have about 20. Is that correct, Gail?
Yes, we have about 20 teachers that are involved in the cohort now. Again, thank you, Kristy. Yes, I am a district facilitator for letters. And when we do begin our next cohort, there will be an opportunity for other teachers to sign up to participate.
Yeah, being a former, you know, middle grades math and science teacher, I have learned so much from being in that program. You know, that was some learning that I felt that I needed, you know, to be able to support literacy more. And so it has been a wonderful experience, and I'm grateful to have gone through that. But it is a lot. It is. So let's see. So yeah, I think I talked about secondary, and then
Kristy, we had a question there that I can answer about which teachers are going through OG training, what grade levels, et cetera. So we really have kind of a cross section of all of our teachers. We do have kindergarten all the way through high school teachers who have opted to take the Orton-Gillingham 70-hour course, including some of our special ed teachers. We have a speech language pathologist who is going through the training. So we do have kind of a cross section of teachers all across the district and across all grade levels and content areas who are doing the training right now or have been through it.
And I also, they are all teachers receiving training and education about dyslexia to help them understand. I definitely, you know, that is definitely a part of the process. And then of course through foundations, and you know, they definitely learn what to look for. The look for is in the classroom. But again, the most important piece to recognizing those red flags is those universal screeners. And that's why it's so important. You know, if you remember, the law says that we have to identify or refer certain students, and that's what we believe in, universal screening. And we screen all students because we don't want to rely on any subjectivity or bias in what students that we are identifying that may need additional testing or support. And Debbie, I love your question. Are we including parents in OG training? So we actually were discussing that. We don't quite have a plan for it in this moment, but I think it would be wonderful to get some parents involved in that. So
Yep. And
um,
actually, you're right, Kristy. We did just talk about that yesterday. Somebody brought that up to us, one of our colleagues. And so we are working on a plan there. I agree. And I do think that's important as well. And we would love to include that piece. Someone else also asked how many K-5 teachers will be OG trained. We don't know at this point, but we surely would love to have as many as possible. We know that that teacher training is critical, and we want to put all those tools in our teacher's toolbox.
There was another question, Holly, just to answer about why Wilson when everyone's getting OG trained. And so given that Amelia and I are both fellows in training with the Academy, we know and have trained for, I've been training for 7 years. Amelia's probably been training for 7 years. It's a long process to become a fellow and to know the ins and outs of OG. And OG gives you the reason why. Why am I teaching this role? Why am I teaching this to kids? Our teachers have very limited time to plan. And so we use Wilson as a tool because it's a scripted program. And a lot of our teachers, even though they're having that whole why and that, you know, we're giving them those reasons with Orton Gillingham, they need something they can deliver next day, right? So that's the reason why we would have a scripted program and train everyone in OG.
Okay, one more. It says, if boys and girls have the same rates of dyslexia, why do school systems, not necessarily CSD, but why do school systems identify boys more than girls? So they don't really have enough research yet on that, but they think it could potentially be that girls suffer more in silence and boys tend to act out more when they're having issues with reading. The whole concept, if I'm not going to be the dumbest, I'm going to be the joke or the clown in the class. So, but that's not research based. That's just teaching experience and just some things I've seen that girls tend to hold in the things that are happening to them and suffer in silence, where boys are more proactively showing that they're suffering. And so they tend to get identified more. But really the rates, what we do know from research is that the rates are the same.
And I just wanted to say, because sometimes what Jen was talking about, sometimes, you know, scripted can have that negative connotation, but I just want to say I've had the opportunity to get in quite a few classrooms lately and see foundations in action, and you can still see the teacher, the teacher personality coming out. There's different ways. Some teachers are using their active board, some are using the magnetic board, some are, you know, there's just a whole variety of ways it's being taught, but we are giving them that foundation to teach so that they have the quality lessons in front of them every day to provide the students, and the scope and sequence so that they're teaching in that structured way to meet the needs of the students.
And I think doing both is probably the best. Like once you have that training, the OG training coupled with having a program to follow, you can make it even better than it would have been because you have the knowledge behind the program.
Oh yeah, you have the why. So you know, like I think a lot of times teachers get given a program and they blindly follow it. Whereas now they understand why they're doing this, but they also have the ability to follow this program and have time with their families at night. Like it's OG can be a lot, and it's a great thing to be able to direct it at an individual child. But when you're in a classroom, you have 25 kids.
Right.
So I think it's valuable.
Absolutely. The MAP screener, I will say that, yes, they do have the MAP reading fluency, and Gail can speak to this as well. We were actually, you know, evaluating our assessments, like I said, digging into exactly which measure what, and when we needed a new screener for 3rd grade. And so we actually looked quite deeply. In fact, I found in my email the quote where we had decided, anyway, we ended up going with Ames Web, which is another screener, but yes, the MAP, the screener, that was one of the options we definitely looked at. many students? Given that students were virtual, yes. So again, I just can't say enough that universal screening, watching that assessment data, making sure we are not letting any kids fall through the cracks. We've added, quite a few intervention programs this year, including a weekend Saturday program. We've expanded our extended day tutoring program, K-12. We have it in all schools right now. We did our first intercession program over fall break, which was very well received. And, something like that's 3 days, like, you think, how is that going to impact? But, giving kids those little boosts and that little acceleration and building up their confidence is also super important. So, we are really doing everything we can to make sure that we are doing the best we can for all kids, and anything that has been lost over the last couple of years, we are getting back. So.
Amelia, do you or Jen want to talk a little bit about, we had a question about how dyslexia impacts math learning. Could you talk a little bit about that based on your expertise?
I can try. So part of it is retrieval and speed. So you'll see it in things like memorizing math facts, multiplication. I mean, I am likely dyslexic. Multiplication is still really difficult for me. I can do it, but it's taken a lifetime. So that retrieval and word problems will be difficult because that all involves reading. So while they may be great at computation, kids that don't have the problems with memorizing math facts sometimes are great at computation, but then the word problems will still trip them up because that's all reading based. I don't know.
No, I think that's a great answer. Yeah, I mean, word problems are going to be a problem because anything reading is taxing. And so if you're outlaying your cognitive power to read it, then you've exhausted that in order to do the computation. So I think anything that we can do to help alleviate that is helpful.
And then using the brilliant thing about Orton Gillingham is once you learn it really well, you can apply it across disciplines. So while it is more geared towards literacy, you can apply it to things like math and social studies. So there have been people that have been doing Orton Gillingham for a very long time and now have opened centers for OG math, which really is just taking that same approach and applying it to math concepts.
Okay, well, I think that might do it for the evening. I'd like to also acknowledge IDA Georgia again and thank them for all that they do, all of the important work that they do, and for the grant opportunities that they have as well. Those of you who are participants this evening and in the audience, if you registered, in a few days, you will be emailed a certificate of participation. So thank you so much for a wonderful evening. Thank you to IDA Georgia, Jen Burch and Amelia, Courtney Simon, Gail Hardwick, Dr. Beam. Huge thanks to Dr. Beam and her team for all of the work that they're doing to support this work here in City Schools of Decatur. I'm very proud of it. All right, thank you, everybody. Please feel free to reach out if you have any more questions, comments, or concerns. You can find me on the Glenwood Elementary website. And we're just very happy to have you here with us this evening. Thanks a lot, everyone. Good night.